I'm just
Right.
excited about that. So I'm just like I said, just excited about the opportunity. And the book is a gem. So let me talk a little bit
Oh,
about
thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
about your fascination with stories. That's what we do here at the Alluvia
Mhm.
Collective. Is we get people to share stories, and the way that the book is written does that. So I'm just like I said, I'm just honored to do anything I can to help push the notions forward about civil rights and justice and education in that vein. So I just thank you for the book, sir, and I really do appreciate all you've done.
Oh, thank you.
Mhm.
So look, I'm gonna just mute you guys. I'm gonna be in and out, but we're gonna leave it in you guys' hands. And thank you guys so much.
Okay. Also, to the note, Mr. Dennis, I'm a big sports fan, so if we got time at the end,
Okay. All right.
I might get at you. I see where you went to school with Steph Curry. I'm from Memphis.
Yeah.
And I'm,
Yeah.
and I'm,
Okay. All
I'm
right.
awaiting that Grizzlies Golden State game on Christmas. That's going to be my Christmas
Yeah.
gift.
Yeah. That's gonna be the one. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm just thrilled about that. So it should be fine.
Mm.
We do it that way.
All right.
And one last thing, I'm sorry. The Alluvia Collective, we do a book giveaway every month, and this month we selected your book as our book giveaway. So I'll encourage people to log on to our website or to our social media and register, and then at the end of the month we'll do like a drawing, and we'll ship someone a copy of your book.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. And so I may drop that in probably toward the end or just during the conversation, just to let people
Oh,
know
lost
that.
you. Is that
Yeah.
me or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Hey, Mr. Spears, and pleased to meet you,
Yes.
Mr. Dennis.
Hey.
So we'll start in a few. It's 11:28, so we'll give folks about 2 to 3 more minutes. Let them come
Okay.
in.
All right.
Mhm.
Would I be accurate, Mr. Dennis, in saying that you're a Jackson, Mississippi native?
Yeah, I was raised in Jackson.
Yeah,
For sure.
okay.
Raised in Jackson, born in Lafayette. So yeah.
Okay. The Murrah High School graduate?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's close enough.
Right.
I'm originally
My
from
mom
Memphis.
always wants.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, my mom always wants me to put the Lafayette in there. So she's
Okay.
she claims Lafayette, but
Okay.
I was definitely raised in Jackson, Mississippi. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to be clear on that. I was raised in Memphis, and people remind me that you were
right.
I raised here, boy. A lot.
All right.
So I've been here a
Is
while.
that, is that Lafayette or Lafayette?
Lafayette, yeah.
Mhm.
So it is 11:30, Mr. Spears. So for the sake of time, we want to give Mr. Dennis the adequate amount of time so we can go ahead and get started, and people will join us as when they come in.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Chauncey Spears, and I am the Systems Engagement Manager here at the Alluvia Collective, which is a Jackson, Mississippi nonprofit community development firm that we look at community development with a critical mind and a hopeful heart. And today I am excited, I am thrilled to be moderating a discussion, a conversation really, with esteemed writer, author, Lafayette, Louisiana born, Jackson, Mississippi raised, Murrah High School graduate, Mr. Dave Dennis Jr. And we are talking today, among other things, but mainly about a gem of a book. It's called The Movement Made Us, a father, a son, and the legacy of a freedom ride. And I am just thrilled in reading this book. I was struck by a couple of things about the honesty, about the insight, about the stories about it. Just talk a little bit, Mr. Dennis, about the background behind writing this book, and talk a little bit about the Freedom Rides too, for some of our people who may be logging in, some of our students here at Jackson State may be logging in and may not be as familiar with that history. Can you talk a little briefly about, the Freedom Ride, and then why you decided to write a book detailing the role that your esteemed father, Dave Dennis Sr., had in those movement examples, experiences?
Yeah, I mean, this all sort of started. This was a book that I thought I was going to write my entire life. I'd always wanted to be a writer, but I've grown up. As you mentioned, I moved to Jackson when I was 6 years old. My parents moved me to Jackson, and my dad at that time was rekindling his relationship with the movement. So he sort of left in '68, and tried to heal those wounds, and then came back to Jackson with the Algebra Project with Bob Moses, which I'm sure some of your colleagues and students are familiar with. And so we came back to Jackson. I just, my dad and his friends would come over and they would just tell these remarkable stories. I mean, there'd be sitting at the dinner table with Hollis and with Dr. Anderson and Gene Young and all of these Jackson and nationwide heroes. Bob Moses was there all the time, people like that, and they would just tell these harrowing stories. I mean, just these, as a kid, you don't know all of the specifics of civil rights movement work, but you do know about, there's car chases, there's espionage, there's organizing, there's fighting against the United States government. There are things that were fascinating to me, right? And so they told them in really oral history ways that folks get around and talk and talk the dozens or whatever, right? And or play the dozens. And so it was always fascinating to me, so I would just keep them logged away. And eventually I just got to the point where early in my life, probably about high school, I was like, I want to put these in a book. And as my career started going, and as things started progressing, and quite frankly, as Dad was getting older, it's like we need to put these stories down somewhere. And it became really apparent to need to do that in 2016 when Donald Trump was elected, where this country felt very, very scary. It felt dangerous. It felt like we were heading towards something that we were not going to be able to recover from. And there are a lot of people who need to hear stories about how we did just that, and how we fought back. And so I wanted to put these stories within that context. And of course, one of the important stories, impactful stories, is the Freedom Ride, which, a group of young movement workers hopped on these buses, cross interstate lines to integrate, these terminals, integrate these areas and they were, I mean, the first sort of leg. I mean, this is something that had been going on off and on for a while, but when it sort of restarted in the '60s, I mean, they were met with incredible violence in Alabama. There was bombings, there were beatings. People still, people would eventually die from wounds that they suffered on those buses. And there was a debate on if they should continue the rides. And the students, HBCU students, I should also mention to the JSU students here, HBCU students from Dillard and, you know, from Nashville and things like that came down and convinced the elders to continue this ride. They said they would put their lives in jeopardy. And my dad was on that first bus that came out of Montgomery through to Jackson, where they were arrested.
Yeah. And you mentioned students, you know, a little bit about my background. I'm a social studies teacher at heart. I taught history for a while. I work at state level in history standards development. And I'm struck by how young these people were. Your dad was, and when he started. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunity young people have to strike a blow for freedom, and just about, you know, why it's imperative that young people, you know, take the opportunity when they can in order to do this type of work?
Yeah, I mean, this book takes place from 1961 to 1964. My dad, in the beginning of the book, was 20 years old. And at the end of the book is 23 years old, right? And so all of these things are happening. And I mean, all these people were kids that, well, for the most part, they were talking about. The elder statesman in the group was Bob Moses, and he was 26 years old. So these were all organizing efforts by students and student-aged kids. And so you have to think about that in the context of who can actually create movements, who can get us free in this country. And oftentimes it is the students in collaboration. It was important to note, in collaboration with the elders who came before. It is cross-generational, because so much of what the students did were accomplished because of the aid and because of the leadership, and a lot of times, of a Fannie Lou Hamer, of a Amzie Moore, of a Ella Baker, of the people who were sort of laid that groundwork before. So I don't want people to think that there should be a division in the generations. It is a collaborative effort where you build upon the people who came before you and you share ideas. You know, like direct action was not always something that the elders were about. You know, like there was, you know, they did not want to go to jail. They were not they had things that they were living for, things like that. But also at the same time, the students were not always necessarily focused on the voter registration and, you know, some of the ownership things that they had, but they would collaborate and come up with these ideas together to form this overall picture of what a movement should look like, where all parts sort of make sense together.
Yeah, indeed. And you also mentioned too, the experience and the things that your dad and other movement workers and leaders witnessed along the way. The brutality, the violence, the oftentimes being maimed, being killed, you know, a lot of that. Well, talk a little bit about the mental health toll that this could take on people. You have a very striking story at the very beginning of the book. I don't want to give too much of it away, but at the beginning of the book, where you're talking about seeing an interview with your dad and seeing him in a different light in that interview that take place. You know, so talk a little bit about the mental health toll that you can often perceive could take place in an instance like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the thing that folks need to understand, is that movement folks fought a war in this country, right? Like, this was a war to install democracy in the country that did not have democracy. And they went through everything that happens in war. They were held hostage, they were beaten, they were bombed, they had to deal with spies, they didn't know who was on their side some of the times. There was assassinations, and unlike a war, there was no home base. There was no place you can go to and rest your head at night and say that I'm safe here, right? Because they were bombing houses. Obviously, we know Medgar Evers was killed outside of his home, right? So to live like that nonstop. But well, here's, you know, when you go and fight in a war, you fight, you know, like they may send you for 6 months and you got to come back, and then 18 months total, right? You know, my dad, for instance, was embedded in this place from 1961 until 1968, right? Nonstop. no vacations, no mental health breaks, and you think you're going to die every single day that you're out there, right? So how do you go about the rest of your life after you have come to terms with the fact that you are probably going to die at the age of 25 or whatever, right? So the mental health, I mean, it was devastating. I mean, it still impacts my day. He still has trouble sleeping, thinking about these things. He still has survivor's guilt from the fact that so many of his friends did not make it. And so we are dealing with a community of people who have had these terrifying things happen to them, and then you got to go out and live the rest of the world, and you don't get you don't get like a VA benefit. There's no like, I'm a veteran of the civil rights movement. Can I get, mental health treatment? Can I get health care? Can I get, are there jobs for me? There's none of that. They got to go out and make it out on their own. We don't have, as a country, because we don't reckon with our past, don't reckon with the idea that these folks were heroes and they need this sort of stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think I've seen in other talks you've talked about, possibly advocating for
Mhm.
civil rights veterans getting some of those benefits you talked about, because they are actively working to expand democracy. Just like we say that a lot of our wars are being fought to protect and expand democracy around the world. Can you talk a little bit about how the civil rights movement is an effort in expanding and protecting democracy for more and more people?
Well, the civil rights movement installed democracy. It created democracy in America. Like, there was no democracy in America before the civil rights movement. I mean, there was, if you can't vote, there's no democracy, right? So if you
Right.
think about in Mississippi, I think there was, 2,000 people, 2,000 Black folks who were registered to vote, who could vote in Mississippi up until the Voting Rights Act, right? So you think about how many Black folks there are in Mississippi, and the fact that the majority of them could not vote. That's not democracy. And so you have situations where people who are representing your state are not representing the actual people who live in that state.
Mhm.
And what these, movement workers did, what these freedom fighters did, is they created a situation where there was now democracy in the place where they wanted democracy to be the least. And so at that is a vital part of the United States history, because like now, you can draw a through line. There is no Barack Obama without, the efforts of these workers to make sure that people could vote. There is no Benny Thompson on a January 6th committee trying to hold people accountable if there is no no democracy. And so what they did was change the course of this country. And so often when we talk about wars, we talk about why we go out and fight in these other places traditionally and historically, is to preserve or install democracy in these places, right? There have been so many lives lost to install democracy, and then you come back and you get treated, somewhat like a hero. Well, what these folks did is they did that in Mississippi, in America, and should be treated as heroes for doing that.
Right, right. And you're so right. I mean, I worked, and I still work with the Mississippi Civil Rights Education Commission here,
Mhm.
Which is a actual standing commission by law here in Mississippi that's chartered with documenting and preserving and promoting the civil rights education in K-12 spaces and others throughout the state. And one of the things that privileged me, in working with the commission is the contact I had with real movement leaders,
Mhm, mhm.
people like Leslie McLemore and other folk who really put it all on the line, to expand democracy and protect democracy and establish. I like what you
Mhm.
termed it. You establish democracy for people in this country. And one of the things that's fascinating about Jackson State University is that there
Mhm.
are spaces on campus that can serve as places where students can go and learn. And one of those spaces is the Council of Federated Organizations building right
Mhm.
there on campus in Jackson, Mississippi, and Jackson State University, where oftentimes a lot of the discussions around whether or not to continue the freedom rights, the core meetings were held there, and a lot of other SNCC meetings were held there. Can you talk a little bit about the need to preserve and teach this history to more and more young people. Earlier, you talked about the need for young people to collaborate with some of the elders in terms of progressing our country, because the war is not over, the fight is not finished. But we'll talk about the need to actually teach this history in real, whole, and raw ways in order to inspire young people to collaborate and to continue to struggle in this vein.
Well, I want to tell that by telling a story of something that happened in Shreveport, actually, which is one of the stories that one of my favorite stories of the book is a story about the Shreveport, the Louisiana State Fair, right? And the fact that they, in Shreveport, obviously Jackson has a state fair, so similar to that. So much money was going in that fair, and what they would do is there was a white only thing, and for but one day out the week, you'd have like Dog Day, and you have black folks they allow black people to go in segregated by themselves and like get like a morsel of the fair. They would get to ride an occasional ride, or some of but it would just be sort of bare bones. And so what the students decided to do is they were going to essentially shut that state fair down, but they could not, they didn't have the resources to get arrested, to get bail money, do that stuff. So what they did that was so smart is they basically weaponized white fear, right? And white angst about black folks against themselves. So they had their opening parade, and the black kids would sort of scatter around the group of white folks in the parade. And they would just whisper to each other loud enough for white folks to hear and say, them black folks gonna come in here and they're gonna riot, they're gonna do all this stuff, they're gonna do something crazy. And it got to the point that now white folks are scared to go to the fair, right? And now you have your police on horseback, you got your bomb squads, you got all this stuff at the fair, and now it's not inviting to anybody. Nobody wants to go to the fair anymore because it's created a thing, right? And so I'm saying that because, and that essentially is what shut down the fair, right? And led to them integrating it. And I'm saying that to say that often we discount the ingenuity that movement work takes, that it takes movement work to happen, right? We discount the action, like we get this sort of sanitized version of it, like you do a sit-in, you do a protest, you do that, but there was ingenuity in movement work, there's creativity in movement work, and all of that creativity that we see now from young folks in movement work by hopping on TikTok, doing your hashtags, the way that they'll, you'll see somebody buy somebody's domain name and you weaponize it against itself. All of that brilliance is an offshoot of the brilliance that came before. Like what they did, there was no Twitter back then, there was no Instagram back then. They created a viral moment, right? By saying these things and having the word spread by word of mouth, right? And so I think to go back to your question, what we need to learn is that there is a through line of the type of movement work from back then that goes to now. But what we're taught is that old stuff was all about kumbaya, was about getting beaten, was about going to jail, was about playing nice with white folks and, trying to get appeased and then move on. But we don't get taught the actual grit of that work, right? The actual brilliance, the actual disruptiveness, the actual things that happened that changed the course of this country. And I think if we can take it upon ourselves and our teachers and all that to make sure that part is taught, you'll get some real inspirational and really motivational stories. So it's all about preserving those spaces, preserving those stories, and telling them in the way as they actually happen.
Yes, indeed. Yes, the book is called The Movement Made Us, a Father, a Son, and a Legacy of Freedom Rise. And the author is Dave Dennis Jr., noted journalist, writer, sports writer, among other things. I'm just curious about the approach you take in this book and just documenting the stories. What is it about stories that interests you and excites you as a writer, and sharing other people's stories as a way to teach history and a way to document the humanity of a time and a space there.
Yeah, I mean, the story, I mean, this is a story, I mean, this is, I'm not a historian. I don't
Mhm.
write the book from an expert, opinion, expert analysis of history and how all of these national things intertwine. For me, it's about people who are out there on the field, like the people in the trenches and their experience. And the only way to get that is to get their stories. And one of the things I wanted to accomplish with this book, and hope I did, is to understand that everybody who was around back then has a story.
Mhm.
And like what I tell students all the time is that, so often we get told it was Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, maybe Fannie Lou Hamer, maybe a couple other people, but like your uncles and your aunts and your grandparents did something to get us free, right? Like if you were in Jackson, Mississippi, and you're Black, I guarantee you have a grandparent or a great uncle or great aunt who housed somebody for Freedom Summer and made them some fried chicken and drove them from place to place, did something like that. And they were pivotal to the movement work. And so what we need to understand is that if everybody has a story, right, then everybody has something to be proud about, right?
Mhm.
And so for me, it's about getting into all of those aspects of the story and putting them out. I always want to represent the people who are underrepresented and feel like they've been misrepresented. So in general, as a journalist, I try to go out and find the people whose stories are not getting told and tell those stories, because journalism to me is just telling the truth, right? Just telling the truth. And a lot of people's truths don't get told often enough. So I want to go out there and find the people whose truth need to be told.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's just brilliant. What we do here at the Alluvial, we traffic in stories.
Mhm.
Specifically what we do is we get communities together, get people in the community together, put them in a circle and say, tell us about the story when you first recognized that racism was an issue, or tell me a story about your name and about your community. And so what they do is we grow community by people bonding over their shared stories and those experiences. One story, and I don't, like I said, I don't want to give away too much of the book, but one story that really caught my attention was the story that your dad told about a meeting that they were having about whether or not to continue the Freedom Rise. And you had this cross-generational representation. You had the Lord there, Dr. King,
Right. Uh-huh.
along with James Farmer and a lot of folks. And one point that was made was that, and you can of course correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm getting it wrong, but the point about there's no room for God and fear in this room.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that particular story? Because that was a powerful, to me, a pivotal point in your father's commitment to the work was understanding that particular moment. So can you kind of set the stage of that story and how that came about?
Yeah, so my dad went to Montgomery as part of this group I was talking about of HBCU students to talk about if they should continue the Freedom Rise. Now, my dad was still not totally committed to the movement. Now, people need to understand that he was not trying to get arrested, trying to do all that stuff. He went to those meetings because he met a woman named Doris Castle and Dillard, and he thought she was attractive. He wanted to take her out on a date.
Right.
And so, but she convinced him to keep coming to meetings. And eventually, long story short, they convinced him to come to Montgomery to be part of this Freedom Ride discussion. And he was reluctant. He was hoping that the old folks would win out and say that they're not going to do these rides. He didn't want to go on there. But he heard somebody in the room. That's nobody else knows about this. Nobody else knows or remembers anybody saying this. Nobody knows who said it. But somebody in that room said there's no place in this room for both God and fear. And that just sort of snapped Dad into this work. That made him want to, that made him willing to put his life on the line to get folks free. And that was sort of this baptismal moment for him where he heard this and now was fully invested in freedom work.
And see, and that's why storytelling is so important, because that revealed the humanity of the moment. Because one thing, like when I teach students, one thing that I try to stress them is that history is not made by these grandiose decision makers doing these grand policy practices and moves. People in real time with real challenges, living day to day, make choices and decisions. And that then becomes what changes the course of history in many instances. And you miss that oftentimes if you're not actually looking for people's stories who were
Right.
there. One of the reasons why the civil rights work in Mississippi and the education piece of it is so valuable to me is because a lot of these people are still here,
Mhm. Right,
alive,
right.
around to tell the stories. That my son did a project on James Meredith, and James
Mhm.
Meredith holds court at the Kroger on 55
Right,
Springs
right,
Road. And so
right.
I actually took him there, and he met him. He talked with him very briefly, but he talked with him.
Mhm.
He let him know my son, 8 years old, knew that, hey, this is not just a guy you're reading about in the book, but this is a
Right.
real live man living in life and making choices and decisions. So one of the things that that struck me about your approach with stories is that I wonder, and you can chime in on this as well. Do you think that that we as educators we're doing enough to inspire students to see the history around them, to see the potential that, I mean, you had a unique experience because you're growing up,
Right, right. Mm.
around these very, the powerful movement leaders that are just coming around, hanging around the house. But yeah, talk a little bit about that, and then get on to the point about the educators. But how is it like for you, growing up, in that environment? Like you said, you came to Jackson in the '80s, where they're trying to start back up the Algebra Project.
Mm.
But how's it like for you, growing up, in that type of environment?
I mean, for me, it really instilled a source of pride for me, right? Like to feel like so often when you're in Mississippi, they tell you you come from slavery, you come from low education, you come from unhealthy, but like I feel like I come from I know I come from a legacy of freedom work, right? I come from a legacy of resistance. I come from a legacy of people who changed the course of this country, and I have immense pride in where and it has allowed me to shed any inferiority complex that can come from being black and Southern, from being who I am, and feeling pride in that. And I think I can't really speak to what educators are doing, but I know that there is a disconnect somewhere. I know when I was teaching at Morehouse, students wanted to know their history. Students cared about it, but it goes both ways, to be honest, because there are a lot of elders and they have a lot of reason to, a lot of elders do not want to revisit those moments, right? A lot of elders are not willingly, it's not like, I think so often we have this picture that, grandmother, grandfather sitting around the dinner table telling their kids these stories and the kids just sitting on their phone ignoring them. It goes both ways. There are a lot of people who want to know the stories and they're not being offered up because they're so painful, right? So it takes two ways of trying to unearth these stories. It takes the young folks being, because when I was at Morehouse, one of the things I would do is like make sure you go interview an elder. One of my signs to be interview an elder, ask them about their life, ask them about the social issues, and have a conversation with them and record the conversation, and write about it. And I think they love doing that. I think one of the things is that we're brought up in an environment where it's like, don't question your elders, don't, you mind your business, you don't dig into their business, because it was painful for them to bring it back up. So it takes intentionality on both sides to really have this intergenerational conversation. Like, this was not an easy thing for my dad to do, to do this book. We could have gone the rest of our lives and not done this book and had an okay relationship. It was hard to get some of this stuff from him. It was hard to make him revisit that. And it's going to be hard work. It was hard for me to hear him go through this. It was hard for me to learn these things about my history and my past. And so it's painful, painful work. But I think that there is a hunger for it from the young folks, especially. And I think that once the elders start to open up a little bit, they'll see the therapeutic nature of it also.
Yeah. Again, the book is entitled "The Movement Made Us: A Father, a Son, and a Legacy of Freedom Rise." The author is Dave Dennis Jr. And I want to drop a note that we at the Alluvia Collective are selecting this particular book as our December book giveaway book. And so what we do is monthly, we have a book that we encourage people to read and to discuss in their own. And so to help encourage that, we give books away each month. This month will be The Movement Made Us. And so if you want to be a part of the giveaway of a random raffle, just log on to the social media accounts at Alluvial Collective or our website, alluvialcollective.org, and register. And each month we do give away a book. And this month in December, we'll give away The Movement Made Us here. And getting back to growing up in such an environment with so many luminaries just being very regular in your life and the inspiration you drew from it. One of the aspects of this book, obviously, is the conversation about a relationship between you and your father. And, you can talk as much about that as you want to, a little bit I want to, but I also want you to start, to comment on, that aspect of, African American community today. A lot of the challenges that we see are attributed to, what is considered and characterized as a breakdown of the Black family. And I say that as a sociologist by training. But one of these aspects of this book is this, for lack of a better term, this tension about the relationship you have with you and your father. How integral is the father figure in helping you to more to drive to write this book, but also as a commentary on family structure in the Black community, if that's anything there that you're trying to hit at.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I mean, since Black folks have been here, there's been a concerted effort to look at the family structure and compared to how the Eurocentric family structure and try to destroy that within Black folks, right?
Right.
And this, like, my dad and I had the chances of us having a relationship were slim because of what this country does and what this country did to him, right? Like, for him to, first of all, he shouldn't have been old enough to have me. There's that, because he almost died so many times, right? Obviously, he was sent to jail so many times. Obviously, he's dealt with so much mental duress, so many issues of fight or flight, and those moments when his brain was not fully developed, right, where he had these traumatic, life-changing things that happened to him. And how do you go on and be a father and a husband, things like that? And so that is one of the sort of fallouts of this type of stuff, is that we damage families, right? We have people who are vastly damaged and trying to figure themselves out, trying to figure out their place in the world. And you got to fall in love and think about how to raise your children and think about how to bring them up in the best environment. And it was trying. My parents' marriage did not survive my dad's trauma and the things that he had to go through. Me and his relationship almost did not survive that because he was struggling. I mean, he's somebody who has dealt with these very serious issues. And how do we, and it could have been very easy for us to just fall apart. And that's part of a design that they have, where these things just fall apart. And so, the Black quote unquote family structure does not have breakdowns. They're broken down intentionally. And this was part of something that should have done that. So me and my dad being able to do this book is resistance work. We're resisting that family breakdown. We're refusing to let what has happened tear at the fabric of our relationship. And then again, of course, like me as a father, right? And my relationship with my kids and how I bring them up and how I could, break generational curses, as they say, or like carry on these legacies and try to love on them in the way that we have not been taught to love on our children.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. When you think about, what it takes for men to assume a role of a responsibility for a family, and then as you mentioned, you're trying to develop as a young man, and then now you're faced with,
Mm.
the traumas of working against Jim Crow segregation and injustices that you don't know if you're going to live tomorrow or the next day. It really is.
Right.
It really is war. I often wonder about the toll that it took, because the book talks a lot about that on your father's mental health and your relationship between you and your father and things of that nature. There is a running discourse, and I kind of help me to understand. There's a running discourse. I'll tell you a brief story. We storied people at the Louis. At my church here a couple weeks ago, a young lady, she's a retired educator. She came to me and said, Brother Spears, you talk a good game, but we had something during segregation that the community don't have anymore today. And she was talking specifically about the value we place on education in those spaces. Now, I was born after the movement. I'm a '70s baby. I'll put it that way. And so I when I'm in those spaces, I never come back and say, well, we had it better off during segregation than we have it today, because I can't speak. All I've never known is so-called legal integration.
Right.
But there is a vein from some people who lived through those Jim Crow segregated spaces, who talk about the Black community being stronger, having more of a sense of community, having more of a sense of value. And one of those things is that the institutions that we had, the schools, the businesses, the parks, they were under fully our control. The resources might have been there to have the most pristine, physical plants, but the power structures were thoroughly, Black community driven and contained. When you look at the toll that the movement had on people like your father, mentally, economically, politically, socially, culturally, personally, would you argue for or against the notion that, the gains were worth the sacrifices in terms of how we show up in spaces today and the challenges are still before us as a people?
Yeah, I lean to Dad on that one, and so he has said it's absolutely worth it. I mean, especially when you're looking at what folks are doing now in terms of resistance movements. Now, obviously, he has I think he shares a lot of that sentiment about how integration and all that stuff has damaged a lot of these Black institutions in a lot of different ways. And some of those negatives that have come from that, and the fact that I don't think, I think sometimes we put the onus a little bit on the fact that, well, Black folks just wanted to be around white folks and do all this stuff, and when it's really, that's not the case. Black folks are always trying to own their own businesses and own their own things and have their own stuff. But once that, they started getting those Black dollars, they were shutting down, they were tearing down all these Black businesses that we used to go to, and so, I think I wish that sometimes we had a little bit more grace with ourselves and how we came up out of, because we should have never been in those situations in the first place, to have to figure out how integration works and all that stuff. And so I want us to have a little bit more grace with how we came out of integration, right? I mean, came out of segregation and integrated, things like that, because they were going to find ways to tear down what we had regardless. I mean, Black Wall Street took place, 100 years ago. And so they were still tearing those things down. But in terms of the gains and all that stuff, I lean on the elders. And if they feel like it is worth it, and you can see the fruits of that work, this book doesn't happen without them doing that. So I definitely think that there's something to how that pride that they feel.
Yeah. And I think also too, I think like you mentioned earlier, the Black family isn't just tearing apart, it's being deconstructed. So this idea that we have a situation in our community where people are just not caring anymore, I
Right.
think it needs you know, a systemic critique. It needs an interrogation of the
Mhm.
machinations that are taking place both in schools and job opportunities and community development and all these other areas where, you know, people are making constrained choices
Right, right.
about a lot of things, you know, and I think that, you know, that kind of way of seeing our contemporary challenges comes as we work hard to educate each
Right, yeah,
other, as we work hard to talk about, you know, what the movement did give us, and the strategies and creativity and ingenuity, as you
mm,
talked about earlier, come into play as we continue to struggle into doing
right.
these things. You mentioned earlier your experience working at Morehouse. I want to preface this by saying Morehouse College, class of '97. Oh,
Okay, all right.
you know, so I was just excited about that. And you also mentioned in several of the meetings that you talk about in the book, a lot of students are coming from HBCUs
Mm,
to come and to strategize and to plan out, you know, next steps in the movement. How important are HBCU spaces today in the 21st century? Now, you know,
mm,
people are beginning to question the relevance of having an
mm.
HBCU education, and I'm an advocate for it, of course. You know,
Right,
Jackson State
right.
University is hosting this particular conversation. You know, so can you speak to, what type of, what HBCUs bring to the movement today, you know, in terms of the opportunity to actually leverage our education and the education of young people for the transformative and sustainable change in local communities?
Yeah, I mean, the HBCU is where, I mean, it's where the stuff originates so often, where you have Black um thinkers, Black folks in shared spaces, all with the goal of getting each other free. I think sometimes in these spaces we have situations in which there are Black folks who don't want to upset the apple cart, as they say. Black folks who don't want to bring too much quote unquote negative attention. I mean, that's been the case. They kicked my dad politely, kicked my dad out of Diller for being on the Freedom Rides.
Mhm.
So there's been also that there's been that tension. There's been that tension of students who are, vastly dedicated to getting us free and movement work, and then there's some people who are in charge in these spaces who don't want that to happen for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And I think that sort of limits the possibility of what we have at HBCUs. I mean, everybody working toward the same goal, the same accord of what's best for Black folks is the way, the best uses of the HBCU, and thinking about things on our terms.
Mhm.
So it's not so but sometimes you have some heads of departments and all that who think, all right, you need to learn Shakespeare, but you don't need to learn Baldwin.
Mm.
And that type of stuff is the stuff that is difficult for me. I think one of the frustrations I have at a Morehouse and other places is that there's a respectability in this idea of who we think about should be free, right? Like we think
Mm.
about the Black man as the person needs to be free, when we're not standing with our Black women and Black queer folks in the
Mhm.
way that we should, and evolving the idea of who should be part of our movement work, or who should be part of our goals of liberating folks.
Mhm.
And so those are the things that sort of I think are obstacles and hurdles that we need to get past within our own spaces. But
Mhm.
I think the apparatus is there for us to be able to, work together to make these HBCUs as intersectional and as freedom focused as possible.
Wow, that's very powerful. The aspect of respectability
Mm-hmm.
that comes up. I can remember freshman at Morehouse College. There was a big to do about, Crown Forum
Uh,
and,
uh,
and speaker at Crown Forum, and there was a push to have Louis Farrakhan come
okay.
and speak at Crown Forum, and of course, administration is like, well, wait a minute.
Right.
We have some donors, some board members who may object to having Louis Farrakhan come
Right.
and speak. And of course, students being students, we want to protest Crown Forum until we can get
Right.
Farrakhan. And And I think that, like you said, I think there's some grace that we can afford, you
Mhm.
know, our elders, because for so long, and you look at people who were obtaining these degrees back in during Jim Crow, 40s and
Mhm.
50s, you know, who want to be engineers, who want to be attorneys, who want to be dentists and doctors, and they need opportunities. And to
Right.
gain those opportunities, you know, you have to kind of show yourself acceptable to the power structure.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so oftentimes, you know, that means not just with styles of dress and language, but also about certain types of values you have to have and things of that
Right.
nature.
Mhm.
So but you're right, you know, at some point, you know, how do we nurture
Mhm.
that progress that embraces the intersectionality of our identities? You know, one of the things we
Right.
talk about here at the Alluvial is that, yes, race dominates a lot of our identity, especially as Black people, you know, but we're also husbands and
Mhm.
fathers and mothers, and we're also, maybe homosexual,
Mhm.
maybe heterosexual, you may be transgender, you may also be skinny, fat, may also
Mhm.
be short, tall, you may also be from the South, from the North. You may also have access to a lot of wealth, access to very little wealth. All these things play into how you show up in spaces. So how can we nurture this idea about managing the tension between access to opportunity at the same time, embracing the full humanity of who we are as a community? How can we nurture that in our HBCUs better? What you think from your experience at Morehouse?
I mean, I just think that there shouldn't be any tension at all. I think it's just be nurturing who you are as a person. Like if there's an institution that will not give me a job or give me or bring me on or support me because of my sexual orientation or how I dress or how my hair is or how I talk, that institution needs to be torn down and another one needs to be built in its place. And
Wow.
so I think I don't think there should be a tension at all. Now I do have sympathy for the higher ups of these HBCUs because they understand also that like you mentioned with the Farrakhan thing, that their whole school gets shut down if somebody pulls some of this money. So I understand that
Right.
they have tough jobs also, but for me, I'm always going to lean towards supporting people to be who they are,
Mhm.
because that's going to get us more free than having five doctors and six lawyers come out of my class if those doctors and lawyers are not being allowed to be put in spaces where they can be doctors and lawyers the way that they have, the way that fit their morals and the way that fits towards getting folks, overall as free as possible.
Mhm. Yes, the book is called "The Movement Made Us." A father, a son, and the legacy of a freedom rides. The author is Dave Dennis Jr., noted journalist and writer, and raised in Jackson, Mississippi.
Right.
With that Murrah High School graduate, by the way. But shout out to those at Murrah High School there. And I want to talk a little bit about what you want in terms of main takeaways. As say, for instance, if I'm a college student, I pick up this book. What do you want that student to take away from reading this book? What are some of the essential lessons you want them to take away from reading this book?
I want people to feel as though, I think that so often we get told, like I said, that you have to be willing to sacrifice your life or go all in movement work to be part of the movement. And it's scary, it scares people because you're a college student. You're like, I got to get these degrees. I got to move out my house. I may have a kid or something like that. I don't want to do all that stuff. And so, what this book I hope will encourage people to do is if you do something, if you just dip your toe in it, then you're contributing to movement work, right?
Mhm.
And then the next person who tries to dip their toe in it will also be contributing to movement work. And if
Mhm.
everybody sort of finds their place, then we have a movement that's built. You don't have to, feel the pressure to be this world changing leader. You just got to do something. And I think
Mhm.
that's the thing I want folks to really lean in on.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. This idea of doing your part and
Mhm.
and understanding who you are as an individual, and your place in society, and seeing something that you want to see change and working
Mhm.
to make it happen. in any way that you possibly can. Let's talk a little bit about your career path. We're here with a lot of students here at Jackson State University who may be interested in writing. Talk a little bit how did you go from high school student in Jackson, Mississippi to, published author, noted journalist, award-winning journalist, and what you're doing now with your writing with ESPN and all those other things. How do you go from that high school student to where you are now? Talk a little bit about that journey.
Well, I graduated from Murrah, and I went to Davidson College, North Carolina. I wanted to go to a small liberal arts school, just because I wanted to go to a small school. Made it to Davidson College, and at that time I didn't know. I know I wanted to write, but I wanted to. I got really into writing about hip hop. I was a hip hop journalist. I wanted to be like in the Source. I wanted to be like writing for Double XL and that type of stuff. Which kids here is probably before your time. Those are actual. That's what we call magazines. You had to go buy them and hold them in your hand. And so I wanted to do that. And so I wrote at this time. There was something called the blog era was happening, where these hip hop blogs are sort of taking over. And I started writing for one called The Smoking Section. I was big into hip hop. I was a hip hop journalist for many years. And then and freelancing and not making any money at all, which I think is important to note. I was very poor for a very long time, and right around 2012 or so, when Trayvon Martin gets killed, I start to move into more of a social justice stuff and the pop culture, race, things like that. And about 2016, I started freelancing at ESPN. At a site called The Undefeated there. And now, as of 2021, I'm full time and, just working my way up. I'm in the studio right now. In a few minutes, I'm going to be on Around the Horn on TV. So I got my notes here for TV. And I'll be on, actually at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock your time today, I'll be on TV talking sports. So that's, and repping and talking about Jackson as much as I can and Davidson and all that stuff. Like that's sort of where I'll be doing. So you'll see me on TV and it's been a wild journey. It's been an unexpected journey, but I will say that the whole time I've told the truth, and that's probably been the most important thing to me.
Wow. And just a logistic question. How much time do you have left? How much time do we have left? In this conversation, I don't want to hold you up or anything.
We have, I'm sorry. We go to 12:30.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
good. That's good to know because
Right,
I
yeah.
thought we were going to one. See, because see,
I know it's good. It is great. I am thoroughly enjoying it, but it's
yeah, we have
a long
12. So we'll
time.
wrap it up 12:30. So let me get
Yes, sir.
2 more points in quickly.
Okay. All right. Let's do it.
One, the state of hip hop. I'm a hip hop head as
Okay.
well.
All right.
Okay, so do you see a need for a Black arts aesthetic in hip hop today, or is it just let people rap about whatever they rap about, however they rap about it, or should there be a more balance in the images that we see in the music that's created today, like it was say in the golden age between '88 and '94 or something like that? What's the state of hip hop today in your estimation?
I mean, I think every golden age, depending on what age you are, you think about your age as the golden age.
Yeah.
For every, we could talk about 88 to 94 as this sort of like super conscious hip hop era, right? But we can also talk about it as like 2 Live Crew, doing their thing, and some of the stuff NWA was talking about and all that stuff. Like we could talk about that also. I think every genre, every stage of hip hop has had that. I think, the more capitalism gets intertwined with hip hop, the more it gets troublesome, and especially high stakes capitalism, especially when we're talking about billionaires and people who have the ability to change very important things. Then it's sort of like I tend to think that expression, is always that Black expression for the most part is always going to follow in this important tradition of what we've been doing as artists, right? And I think sometimes, and we got to check folks, we got to check folks when they go too far. We got to support them as they're trying to do it. But I think one of the things that we do so often is we pile on to the young kids, we pile on to the little babies, we pile on to, those folks and tell them what they need to do when Jay-Z's 50 years old. Jay-Z 50 years old and he's over here shaking hands with Roger Goodell. And so we need to put in his power dynamic is way more inflated than somebody like Lil Baby, right? And so we got to check folks. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday about the fact that you need to love Black people more than you love any one Black person. And so if you have, I've written about people I love dearly, in terms of being fans. When they mess up, you gotta tell them that they messing up, because we got to get ourselves free no matter what.
It's about progress,
Right, yeah.
and progress is about, correction, reflection, and things of that nature.
Mhm.
We got to have another conversation about
Right.
it. But I don't know if we can do it through Jackson State or whatever, make it happen. We gotta have a conversation.
Oh,
right here.
anytime.
Yeah. One last thing, and I can't let you go. You mentioned you're going to be on Around the Horn this afternoon. Coach Prime. We here at Jackson State University. Coach Prime.
Right.
What we laud the attention and the exposure and the elevation he's had at HBCUs in general, sports in particular. What do you see as the future, for Coach Prime and the Jackson State program and HBCUs in general in terms of sports as a result of what he's already done? We don't necessarily have to speculate on what he's going to do,
Right.
in terms of the offers, but what do you see the trajectory of HBCU sports now that it has experienced for these past couple of years, Coach Prime effect?
Yeah, obviously Deion Sanders is a singular figure, right? In terms of his popularity, in terms of the money he has, in terms of his charisma, things like that. But it's not like, some people say, well, there's just a bunch of other Deion Sanders going to take his place. Like, that's not going to happen. But he has set somewhat of a blueprint for you to understand how to bring HBCUs to the prominence that they need to bring. When you have Coach Nick Saban out here complaining about somebody getting signed to Jackson State, he's upsetting some folks in some powerful places. And that they're trying to get him up out of there. But I think, we should think about not just him as one figure. Think about where's the next Coach Prime going to come from, right? Like, how is Southern going to get a Coach Prime? How's Grambling going to get a Coach Prime? Where are these Coach Primes going to come from that are going to make this a more, like, if we are relying on one guy to bring HBCUs back to where they need to be, then we're going to fail, right? We got to figure out how to make a structure that, obviously we see Eddie George is doing this thing, but like, who's next? Who's the next person that's going to come in across the board, right? On basketball, baseball, all that stuff that's going to come in and start coaching these teams and getting these players and getting these NIL deals in a way that he's done. Like, we can't just put all our faith in one dude to do all this.
Right. I agree. Thank you so much. The book is The Movement Made Us, A Father, a Son, and a Legacy of Freedom Rides. The author is the esteemed award-winning journalist David Dennis Jr., Lafayette, Louisiana born, Jackson, Mississippi raised. And I'm just excited about the book. Go out and get it. It's a gem of a book, and I do appreciate your time, sir. And like I said, we need to have another conversation.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
keep it going. Yes. Thank you so much for your time, sir. Yes.
And thank you, Mr. Dennis. Thank you for sharing the time. Thank you, Mr. Spears. A wonderful job. Great conversation, so forth. And so we distributed about 50 copies on campus. And so folks that have their hands on the book. And so again, thank you. We just can't say thank you enough for taking your time today and sharing moments of your book with us. And we look forward to more conversations with you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Bye, everybody. Thank you for attending. Okay.